Hello everyone and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from. Without further ado, let's begin the story. The first time it happened, Mira thought it was a fluke, a trick of light and shadow, or perhaps her tired eyes playing tricks after hours at the easel. She had been working on a still life for her advanced composition class. A simple arrangement of bottles, a ceramic bowl, and a draped cloth. But instead of focusing on the objects themselves, she had become fascinated with the spaces between them, the negative shapes created by the absence of objects rather than their presence. Professor Whitaker had introduced the concept the previous week. Negative space is just as important as positive space, he'd explained, moving around the classroom with his characteristic energy. Most beginning artists only see the objects. Advanced artists see the shapes between the objects, the negative spaces that define boundaries and create balance. The assignment was straightforward. Create a composition focusing primarily on negative space. Mira had taken to it immediately, finding something liberating about painting absence rather than presence. She had worked late into the night in the empty studio, the campus quiet around her. When she finally stepped back to assess her progress, she noticed something odd in the dark triangle formed between two bottles and the edge of the canvas. A face, not clearly defined, but unmistakably face-like. Two dark spots suggesting eyes, a vertical shadow implying a nose, a horizontal line that could be a mouth. She hadn't painted it intentionally. It had simply emerged from the interplay of shapes and shadows. Pareidolia, she murmured to herself, naming the psychological phenomenon where humans perceive patterns, especially faces, in random stimuli. The same mechanism that made people see the man in the moon or Jesus on toast. Nothing unusual. She packed up her supplies and left the face as it was. It added an interesting element to the composition, a little Easter egg for anyone looking closely enough to find it. When she presented the painting in class the following week, Professor Whitaker praised her understanding of negative space. During critique, another student raised his hand. "There's a face in that dark area between the bottles," he said, pointing. "I see it too," another student chimed in. "And there's another one, in the shadow beneath the bowl." Mira looked where the second student was pointing. She hadn't noticed that face before, but now it was obvious. A more defined visage than the first, with hollowed eyes that seemed to stare directly at the viewer. Interesting use of pareidolia. Professor Whitaker nodded approvingly. Our brains are wired to find faces, especially in ambiguous visual information. Mira has cleverly exploited that tendency. "I didn't actually paint those intentionally," Mira admitted. "They just appeared in the process." Professor Whitaker's eyebrows rose slightly. "Even more interesting. Your subconscious at work, perhaps. The best art often emerges from places we don't consciously access." After class, he held her back. "You have a natural affinity for this technique," he said, studying her painting with intensity. "Have you considered developing it further?" "Perhaps. As the focus for your senior project, Mira hadn't, but the idea took root immediately. The accidental faces fascinated her. How had her hand created something her conscious mind hadn't intended? "I'd like that," she said. "Working with negative space feels right somehow." Professor Whitaker nodded, still looking at the painting, rather than at her. "Just be careful," he added, his tone shifting slightly. "Sometimes when we stare too long into empty spaces, we start to see things that perhaps aren't meant to be seen." Mira laughed, assuming he was joking. "I'll try not to summon any demons through my still lifes." He didn't laugh in return. Art history is full of painters who became obsessed with what exists between objects rather than the objects themselves. Not all of them maintained their equilibrium. He finally looked at her, his expression serious. "Just keep your feet on the ground, Mira." She nodded, slightly unsettled by his intensity, but too intrigued by the new direction to be deterred. Over the next few weeks, Mira produced a series of paintings focused exclusively on negative space. She worked with various arrangements, architectural spaces, natural settings, human figures, always emphasizing the shapes between and around rather than the objects themselves. And in every painting, faces emerged, sometimes subtle, sometimes startlingly clear. Never intentionally painted, yet undeniably present once the work was complete. Her classmates began to comment on the creepy vibe of her work. Professor Whitaker watched her progress with a mixture of approval and concern. "You're developing a distinctive style," he told her after reviewing her latest piece. A painting of a crowded cafe where the spaces between patrons revealed a complex network of watching eyes and partial faces. "But I wonder if you're becoming too fixated on these emergent figures." "They're fascinating," Mira defended. "I never know what's going to appear. It's like the painting creates itself." "That's precisely what concerns me," he replied. "Art should be guided by the artist's intention, not the other way around." But Mira couldn't stop. The faces in her paintings had become more defined, more varied. Some appeared serene, others disturbed or disturbing. Some seemed to watch the viewer, others to watch the human figures within the paintings themselves. Each one emerged organically from her brushwork, unplanned, yet inevitable. The turning point came one evening in her apartment. Mira had been staring at her latest unfinished canvas, trying to decide how to develop the negative space between a chair and a window. As she concentrated, her gaze drifted to the actual corner of her room, the dark, triangular space between her bookshelf and the wall. Something moved there, not physically, not in a way that disturbed the air or made sound. More like a shift in perception, as if the darkness had folded in on itself momentarily. Mira blinked, and for an instant, she saw it clearly. A face in the corner, watching her. The same kind of face that appeared in her paintings, not fully human, not fully formed, existing in the in-between spaces of reality. She jerked back, knocking over her palette. By the time she looked again, the corner was just a corner, empty shadow between solid objects. "I'm working too hard," she muttered, pressing her palms against her eyes. "Need to sleep more." But in the following days, she began noticing similar phenomena in other negative spaces. The gap between buildings visible from her bedroom window, the space beneath her desk, the area between hanging clothes in her closet. Momentary glimpses of faces and figures, always in her peripheral vision, always gone when she tried to look directly. She told no one, afraid they would think she was hallucinating or having some kind of breakdown. Instead, she channeled the experiences into her work, painting with increasing fervor. The faces in her art became more numerous, more detailed, more alive. Her senior project exhibition was scheduled for December, and by November, she had produced enough work to fill the Yasau small gallery space allocated to her. Professor Whitaker helped her select and arrange the pieces, his concern now evident in every interaction. "These are powerful works, Mira," he said as they hung the final painting. Her largest and most complex piece, where the negative spaces between a crowd of concert-goers revealed an intricate pattern of watching entities. "But I'm worried about you. You look exhausted." She was exhausted. Sleep had become difficult, her apartment now seeming full of watching presences in every shadow, every corner, every space between objects. She had taken to sleeping with lights on, though it didn't help. The entities existed in negative space, not in darkness. Light only created more defined shadows, more places for them to manifest. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just working hard to finish everything." Professor Whitaker studied her face. "There's something I should have shared with you earlier," he said finally. "When I saw your first negative space painting, I recognized something familiar, a particular quality I've seen before." He gestured to a bench, and they both sat. "Before I taught here, I studied art history with a focus on artists who reported unusual perceptual experiences. There's a subset of painters throughout history who became obsessed with negative space and began seeing entities within it." Mira's heart pounded. "What kind of entities?" "They described them differently, some as angels, some as demons, some as beings from other dimensions." The terminology changed with the cultural context, but the experience was consistent. Figures that existed in the spaces between objects visible only peripherally or through artistic representation. That's... Mira swallowed hard. That sounds like schizophrenia or some other mental illness. Perhaps, he acknowledged. That's certainly the modern explanation. But these artists weren't otherwise impaired. They functioned normally except for this specific perception. And their art. He looked around at her paintings. Their art had a particular quality, a way of revealing what exists in negative space that most people never notice. Like mine, Mira whispered. He nodded. Like yours, which is why I should have warned you more explicitly. These perceptions tend to intensify with focus. The more you paint negative space, the more you see in it. I'm seeing them, Mira admitted, relief flooding through her at finally saying it aloud. Not just in my paintings, in real spaces, corners, gaps, the spaces between things. They're watching me. Professor Whitaker didn't look surprised. I was afraid of that. It's the pattern these cases typically follow. The question is whether you're revealing something that's actually there or creating it through perception. Does it matter? Mira asked. Either way, they're real to me now. It matters, he said gravely, because of what happened to those other artists. Some managed to step back, to stop focusing on negative space, to paint other subjects. Their perceptions eventually normalized. Others became increasingly obsessed, their work becoming more complex, more revealing. And those artists? What happened to them? Mira pressed when he hesitated. They disappeared, he said simply. Some were found later, apparently having died by suicide, though the circumstances were often strange. Others were never found at all, as if they had somehow crossed over into whatever they were perceiving. Mira looked around the gallery at her work. Dozens of paintings filled with watching faces and partial figures all emerged from the negative spaces she had so carefully rendered. You think my paintings are dangerous? I think they might be inviting something in, he said carefully. These historical cases suggest a pattern. First, the artist perceives these entities in negative space, then represents them in art, which somehow strengthens their presence or their connection to our reality. Like opening a door, Mira murmured. Exactly, like that. And the more you paint them, the wider that door opens. The exhibition opening was scheduled for the following evening. Mira spent a restless night in her apartment, acutely aware of the watching presences in every corner, every shadow. They no longer hid from her direct gaze. They remained visible, becoming more substantial with each passing hour. In the space between her bed and the wall, a tall, thin figure stood watching. In the corner of her ceiling, a cluster of smaller entities gathered. In the gap between her closet doors, something with too many eyes blinked slowly. None moved toward her. None seemed overtly threatening. They simply watched, as they had been watching from her paintings all along. By morning, Mira had made her decision. She arrived at the gallery 2 hours before the exhibition opening, carrying a large canvas bag. Professor Whitaker was already there, making final adjustments to the lighting. I need to take down my work, she said without preamble. He turned, studying her face. You've seen more of them. They're everywhere now, watching, waiting. She began removing the nearest painting from the wall. I need to destroy these. All of them. Professor Whitaker didn't try to stop her. Are you sure that's the solution? These entities, whatever they are, existed before you painted them. You just perceived what was already there. No. Mira shook her head, carefully placing the painting face down on the floor. I didn't just perceive them. I invited them. Every brushstroke was an invitation, every finished piece a doorway. She looked up at him. You were right to warn me. Art isn't just representation, it's creation. I've been creating connections. To whatever these things are. Together, they removed all 23 paintings from the walls. Mira had brought canvas cutting tools, and methodically she began destroying each work. slashing through the carefully rendered negative spaces where faces and figures lurked. As she cut through each canvas, she felt a subtle shift in the air around her, as if pressure was being released. The watching presences that had followed her to the gallery seemed to recede slightly with each painting destroyed. Professor Whitaker helped silently, gathering the ruined canvases into trash bags. When they finished, Mira felt lighter than she had in weeks, though not entirely free. "They're still there," she said, glancing at the corner of the gallery where several entities remained, watching with what she now interpreted as frustration, but fainter, more distant. "The connection is weakened," Professor Whitaker nodded, "but not broken entirely. You'll need to stop painting negative space completely. Focus on solid objects, defined forms. Ground yourself in the physical rather than the spaces between." "What do I tell everyone about the exhibition?" He considered this. Health issues, a personal crisis. It doesn't matter. What matters is closing the door you've inadvertently opened. In the weeks that followed, Mira did exactly that. She switched to landscape painting, focusing on solid mountains, definite trees, tangible clouds. She rearranged her apartment to eliminate ambiguous spaces, pushing furniture against walls, removing items that created complex shadows. Gradually, the entities receded from her perception. They never disappeared entirely. She would always glimpse them occasionally in her peripheral vision, always sense their presence in empty corners and shadowed recesses. But they no longer dominated her awareness, no longer seemed to be watching with such focused intent. For her final senior project, she presented a series of hyper-realistic still lifes, fruits, flowers, everyday objects painted with meticulous attention to their physical presence rather than the spaces between them. Professor Whitaker approved the new direction without comment on the abrupt change of subject matter. At her graduation, he pulled her aside. "Have they gone?" he asked. Quietly. "Mostly," she replied. "I still see them sometimes, but they're fainter, more distant. As long as I don't focus on them, they seem to lose interest in me." He nodded. "That's typically how it resolves, when it resolves well. The perception never disappears completely once activated, but it can be managed." "Were you ever—" Mira hesitated, then asked the question she'd wondered for months. "Did you ever see them yourself?" Professor Whitaker smiled faintly. "Why do you think I recognized what was happening to you so quickly? I had my own experience with negative space in my younger years. Fortunately, I had a mentor who recognized the signs and guided me away from that particular abyss." "As you did for me," Mira said gratefully. "As I tried to do," he corrected. "Though I should have been more direct from the beginning. Your talent made me curious to see how far you would go, which was irresponsible of me." Mira thought of the destroyed paintings, the entities they had revealed, the doorways they had nearly opened. "Do you think they're really there, objectively existing in some way? Or are they just projections of our minds?" Professor Whitaker considered the question seriously. "I think the distinction may be meaningless. Perception shapes reality. If we perceive something consistently enough with enough focus and intention, perhaps we give it a kind of existence. Like art itself," Mira suggested. "Creating something from nothing." "Exactly like that. Which is why art has always been considered powerful, even dangerous in some contexts. It's not just representation, it's manifestation." As they parted ways, Mira glanced at the space between two buildings across the campus quad. For an instant, she saw a familiar watching presence, one of the entities that had appeared most frequently in her destroyed paintings. It seemed to nod to her before fading from view. She turned away deliberately, focusing instead on the solid forms of trees and buildings around her. Whatever existed in negative space would continue to exist, with or without her attention. The key was understanding that attention itself was a kind of invitation, and some invitations were better left unextended. In her subsequent career as an illustrator, Mira developed a style known for its bold, definite forms and minimal negative space. Critics sometimes commented on the grounded solidity of her work, its emphatic physicality. None of them noticed the single small area of negative space she included in each illustration. A tiny acknowledgement of what existed between and beyond the physical world. Not an invitation, but a recognition. Not a door opened, but a respectful nod through a firmly closed window. After all, negative space was real as the objects that defined it. The trick was remembering which side of that boundary humans were meant to inhabit, and which entities were best left to their own dimensional interstices, watching but not invited in. The first time I saw him was outside Tucson, where Interstate 10 stretches empty and straight across the desert. It was just past midnight, my headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt solid. The CB radio had gone quiet hours ago, leaving me alone with the hum of tires and the occasional static-laced country song from a distant station. Then my high beams caught him, a tall figure standing on the shoulder, thumb extended, face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He wore a long coat despite the desert heat, his stance perfectly still as I approached. I didn't stop. 16 years of long-haul driving had taught me caution, especially on deserted stretches of highway in the dead of night. But as I passed, something made me glance in my side mirror. He was gone. No movement, no indication he'd stepped back from the road or ducked down. Simply gone, as if he'd never been there at all. I chalked it up to fatigue, the kind that plays tricks on a driver's mind after too many hours on the road. I stopped at the next rest area, splashed cold water on my face, and downed a cup of bitter vending machine coffee before continuing my route to El Paso. The second time was 3 days later, outside Nashville, over 1,000 miles from where I'd first seen him. Same stance, same coat, same wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, same extended thumb. This time I slowed instinctively, pulling slightly toward the shoulder before common sense reasserted itself. Nashville to Tucson was a hell of a commute for a hitchhiker. It couldn't be the same man. But as my truck passed him, I got a better look at his face beneath the hat brim. Gaunt, pale, with eyes that seemed to reflect my headlights too brightly. The same face I'd glimpsed in Arizona. I accelerated, heart pounding, and checked my mirror. Gone again. No movement, no logical explanation. Just there one moment and gone the next. I called my dispatcher when I reached my delivery point in Knoxville. "Hey Diane, quick question. You got any other drivers reporting a weird hitchhiker? Tall guy, long coat, big hat?" "Not that I've heard," she replied. "Why, you picking up strangers, Mike? Against company policy?" "No, nothing like that. Just seen the same guy twice now, in places that don't make sense, 1,000 miles apart." "Probably not the same guy," Diane said reasonably. "They all start to look alike when you've been on the road too long. When's your last vacation day?" 3 months ago, I admitted. "There you go. Your brain's playing tricks. Take some personal time when you get back." I agreed, but didn't schedule any time off. The freight industry doesn't slow down for driver hallucinations, and I had bills to pay. The third sighting came a week later in western Pennsylvania. A rainy night on I-76. Same figure, same posture, same extended thumb, same impossible presence, where no hitchhiker should logically be. This time I pulled over. I can't explain why I stopped. Curiosity, maybe. Or the growing certainty that I wasn't hallucinating, that something genuinely unexplainable was occurring. Whatever the reason, I found myself easing my 18-wheeler onto the shoulder, hazards blinking in the rain. Through my side mirror, I watched the figure approach. He walked with an odd gait, smooth, almost gliding, his long coat not moving, properly with his steps. When he reached the passenger door, he looked up and I got my first clear view of his face. It was unremarkable in its features, neither young nor old, neither handsome nor ugly. But something about it seemed wrong, like a face assembled from memory rather than born and aged naturally. His skin was pale to the point of translucence, his eyes dark and reflective. I hesitated, then reached over and unlocked the door. He climbed in with fluid grace, bringing no rain with him despite having stood in a downpour. His coat was perfectly dry. He settled into the passenger seat and turned to look at me. "Thank you for stopping, Michael," he said. His voice was pleasant, but odd, like someone speaking through a slight echo chamber. I hadn't told him my name. How do you know who I am? I asked, keeping the truck in park, suddenly aware of how isolated we were on this rainy stretch of highway. I know many things about you, he replied. Born in Lansing, Michigan, divorced 8 years ago, daughter in college studying marine biology, afraid of heights since falling from a treehouse at age 9. My mouth went dry. Who are you? A traveler, like yourself. He gestured toward the road ahead. Shall we continue? You have a schedule to keep. Against my better judgment, I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof. You've been following me, I said. How? I've seen you in Arizona, Tennessee, now Pennsylvania. That's not possible. Not following, he corrected. Waiting. There are places where I can manifest more easily. Liminal spaces on your highways. I've been waiting for you at each one. Waiting? For me specifically? Why? He turned to look out the windshield, his profile sharp against the darkness. Because you'll be involved in an accident. Soon. Outside Chicago. A multiple vehicle collision caused by a drunk driver crossing the median. You survive, but you're changed by what happens. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Is that a threat? A fact, he said simply. I don't cause events. I merely observe them. And warn random truck drivers. About them? I asked, skeptically. Not warning, preparing. He turned back to me. The accident isn't what matters. It's what comes after. What comes after? Instead of answering, he gestured to the side mirror on my door. Look. I glanced at the mirror, then did a double take. The hitchhiker wasn't reflected in it. The passenger seat appeared empty in the reflection, though I could clearly see him sitting beside me. What the hell are you? I whispered. Something that exists in the spaces between, he replied. In the shadows and reflections and peripheries of your reality. Most humans can't perceive us directly, but sometimes after certain experiences, their perception shifts. Like an accident outside Chicago, I said, putting it together. He nodded. Physical trauma sometimes alters perception, removes certain filters your minds naturally impose on reality. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. So you're saying I'm going to start seeing what? Ghosts? Monsters? Us, he corrected. You'll see us. We've always been there, moving alongside your reality. Most humans glimpse us only fleetingly, a shadow movement caught in peripheral vision, a figure that disappears when looked at directly, but after your accident the veil will be thinner for you. And that's a bad thing? The hitchhiker was silent for a moment. It can be overwhelming. Many who suddenly perceive us cannot integrate the experience. They believe they're hallucinating or going mad. Some take their own lives. Jesus, I muttered. So this is what? A courtesy heads up that I'm about to lose my mind. A preparation, he corrected. Knowledge beforehand may help you accept what you perceive later. Understanding that you're not hallucinating, that your mind is simply processing aspects of reality it previously filtered out. I drove in silence for several miles trying to process what he was telling me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the ravings of a lunatic, or better yet, proof that I was overtired and hallucinating this entire conversation. But the empty reflection in my mirror was hard to rationalize away. This accident, I finally said. When exactly does it happen? Can I avoid it? 3 days from now, and no, you cannot avoid it. His certainty was unsettling. Some events are fixed, especially those that alter perception. So I'm just supposed to drive into a deadly accident because you say it's fixed? I demanded. You misunderstand. Your involvement is fixed. The accident will occur whether you try to avoid it or not. If you change your route, take time off, the circumstances will adjust, the outcome remains. That's convenient, I said bitterly. Unfalsifiable prediction. The hitchhiker shrugged. Believe or don't believe. I've delivered my message. The rest is up to you. We drove in silence for another 20 minutes. I had 1,000 questions, but couldn't formulate any of them coherently. The reality of the situation, if it was reality at all, was too bizarre to process. Finally, the hitchhiker spoke again. "This is where I leave you, for now." We were approaching an exit for a small town I'd never heard of. Nothing but a gas station visible from the highway. "That's it?" I asked. "Drop a bombshell about perception-altering accidents and shadow people, then just hop out?" "We'll meet again," he said, his hand on the door handle. "After Chicago. When you can see properly." Before I could respond, he opened the door. While the truck was moving at 65 miles per hour, I shouted and hit the brakes, but he was already gone. Not fallen out, not tumbled along the asphalt. Simply gone, between one moment and the next. I pulled over, heart racing, and sat there with the engine idling. The passenger seat was empty. No indication anyone had been there at all. For the next 3 days, I debated what to do. Call in sick to avoid the Chicago route? That seemed sensible, but the hitchhiker's words haunted me. The circumstances will adjust. The outcome remains. I considered checking myself into a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. Maybe I was having a breakdown. 16 years of solitary highway driving could do that to a person. But the hitchhiker had known things about me. Specific, personal details I'd never shared with strangers. In the end, I did nothing. I continued my route as scheduled, which would take me through Chicago on the exact day the hitchhiker had predicted the accident. Part of me hoped to prove him wrong. A larger part feared he was right. The accident happened exactly as he described. I was on I-90 just outside Chicago, midday traffic moving steadily. Without warning, an SUV coming the opposite direction crossed the median. Later investigation would show the driver was 3 times over the legal alcohol limit. The SUV clipped a sedan which spun into my lane. I swerved to avoid it and clipped another truck. Within seconds, 5 vehicles were involved. I remember the impact, the scream of metal on metal, the disorienting spin as my truck jackknifed. I remember the airbag deploying, the taste of blood in my mouth. Then darkness. I woke in a hospital room, surprisingly intact. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, laceration on my forehead that required 20 stitches. Considering the scale of the accident, I'd been lucky. 2 people in other vehicles had died, several more were critically injured. The police interviewed me, confirmed I wasn't at fault. The insurance paperwork began its grinding process. Standard procedure for a major highway accident. What wasn't? Standard was what I started noticing during my 2nd day in the hospital. It began with the shadows. They moved wrong, not flowing naturally with the objects casting them, but with subtle independence. A nurse's shadow would linger a moment after she left the room. The shadow of an IV stand would stretch toward me when no one was near it. Then, I began seeing them in reflections, figures standing in my peripheral vision that disappeared from the reflection when I turned to look directly. Dark shapes moving in the polished floor, in the blank screen of the television when it was turned off, in the window glass at night. By the 3rd day, I could see them directly, shadow figures moving through the hospital corridors, standing, in corners watching from doorways, not always human-shaped. Some tall and elongated, some squat and amorphous, some with too many limbs or features that shifted constantly. None of the hospital staff seemed to notice them. Patients occasionally glanced toward them but quickly looked away, as if their minds refused to process what their eyes had briefly registered. I said nothing. The hitchhiker's warning echoed in my mind. Many who suddenly perceive us cannot integrate the experience. They believe they're hallucinating or going mad. Was I hallucinating? Going mad? Or seeing something real that had always been there, hidden behind perceptual filters that the accident had somehow damaged? I was released from the hospital after 5 days. The shadow entities followed me home, or more accurately, they were. Already there, already everywhere. Moving through my apartment, standing on street corners, riding in empty seats on the bus, always watching, never interacting. Except for him. The hitchhiker. He was waiting in my apartment when I returned from the hospital, standing by the window, still wearing that long coat and wide-brimmed hat. "You were right," I said, dropping my bag inside the door. "About everything. He nodded. How are you managing the transition? You mean, am I ready to check myself into a psychiatric ward? I asked bitterly. Not yet. But seeing shadow people everywhere I go isn't exactly conducive to mental health. They're not shadows, he corrected. That's simply how your mind interprets entities that exist primarily in dimensions adjacent to your own. Your perception has expanded, but your brain still attempts to categorize what you see within familiar frameworks. Great. Multidimensional beings that look like shadows, that makes me feel much better. I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. Why me? Why did you prepare me when you don't do that for others? The hitchhiker moved to sit in the chair opposite me, his movements still unnaturally fluid. Most who gain the perception do so gradually, brief glimpses over years that their minds rationalize away. Sudden transitions like yours are rare and more difficult to integrate. I intervene in such cases when possible. Out of kindness, I asked skeptically. Out of necessity, he replied. Those who perceive us become points of connection between realities. Unstable perceivers create unstable connections. So I'm what? A dimensional anchor point? Something like that. He leaned forward. Your perception will stabilize over time. You'll learn to filter, to focus selectively. The initial overwhelming awareness will become manageable. And if it doesn't, his expression remained impassive. Then the connection becomes dangerous for you and for us. I looked around my apartment, now seeing shadow entities in every corner, moving along walls, watching from the hallway. There are so many of them. Have they always been here? Always, he confirmed. Your kind evolved alongside ours, perceiving only what was necessary for physical survival. But the capacity for broader perception remains latent in human consciousness. And a traumatic brain injury just happens to activate it? I asked. Not the injury itself, he clarified. Rather, the momentary suspension of consciousness during trauma. A brief cessation of the perceptual filters your mind maintains. When awareness returns, sometimes those filters don't fully re-establish. I thought about this. The accident wasn't random, was it? You people somehow arranged it. For the first time, the hitchhiker looked uncomfortable. We don't directly influence physical events, but we can enhance probabilities, make certain outcomes more likely. You got 2 people killed just so I could see you? I demanded, anger flaring. Their deaths were already probable, he said without emotion. The driver's intoxication level made an accident virtually certain. We merely ensured it occurred at a specific location and time, with your involvement. Why? What's so special? About me? The hitchhiker was silent for a moment. Nothing individually, but collectively humans with expanded perception serve an important function. You become witnesses, acknowledgers of our existence. Why does that matter to you? Because consciousness requires recognition to maintain coherence, he said, even for beings like us. Without perceivers, perception fails. Reality requires witnesses. I tried to process this metaphysical concept while shadow figures moved around my apartment like curious spectators. So I'm supposed to just, what? Live with this? Drive my truck routes while surrounded by interdimensional shadow beings? For now, he nodded. As your perception stabilizes, you'll learn to interact more directly. Some of us will communicate, with you as I do. Others will simply coexist in your awareness. And I don't get a choice in this? The perception cannot be reversed, he said simply. But how you integrate it remains your choice. Some in your position become valuable bridges between realities, others, he trailed off. Go insane, I finished for him. Failed to integrate, he corrected, which is why I intervened, to improve your chances of successful integration. After the hitchhiker left, simply fading from view rather than walking out the door, I sat alone, in my apartment, surrounded by shadow entities that moved with increasing boldness now that I could clearly see them. One approached me cautiously. A smaller figure, vaguely feminine in shape, with what seemed like long, flowing hair made of darker shadows. It reached toward me with an elongated hand, stopping just short of touching my arm. I held perfectly still, heart racing. "Can you understand me?" I asked. The figure tilted what passed for its head, then made a gesture, a slow nod that seemed deliberately human, as if it had learned the movement through observation. "Have you been here all along in my apartment?" Another nod, followed by a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire room. "Not just here," the movement seemed to say. "Everywhere." Over the following weeks, I tried to adjust to my new reality. The trucking company put me on medical leave while I recovered from my injuries, giving me time to adapt to the constant presence of the shadow entities. They were everywhere, on street corners, in grocery stores, moving through parks and buildings. Some seemed to have specific locations they frequented, while others drifted nomadically. None of the people around me could see them, though I noticed patterns in how humans unconsciously interacted with the entities. People would instinctively step around a shadow figure standing in their path, though they showed no awareness of doing so. In crowded areas, spaces would naturally form where the entities congregated, as if some subconscious perception guided human movement. The hitchhiker visited periodically, materializing in my apartment without warning to check on my integration process, as he called it. "You're adapting well," he observed during one such visit about a month after the accident. "Many in your position experience significant psychological distress at this stage." "I'm not saying it's easy," I replied, watching a cluster of shadow entities examining my bookshelf with apparent curiosity. "But I'm managing. The medication helps." I'd been prescribed anti-anxiety medication after describing some of my symptoms to a doctor, carefully editing out the shadow people and focusing instead on the post-traumatic stress from the accident. The pills didn't stop me from seeing the entities, but they helped me remain calm in their presence. "Your perception is still developing," the hitchhiker noted. "You'll begin to see more differentiation soon. We're not all the same kind of being." He was right. As weeks passed, I began noticing distinctions among the shadow entities. Some remained vague and amorphous, but others took on more defined characteristics. Different shapes, different ways of moving, different behaviors. Some seemed merely curious about the human world, observing without interaction. Others appeared more purposeful, moving through spaces as if following established routes or performing specific functions. And some, a smaller subset, seemed aware of my awareness. These would approach me directly, making gestures or movements that suggested attempted communication. The feminine entity from my apartment was one of these, appearing regularly as if checking on me. I began to think of her as Sophie, though I had no idea if these beings had names or individual identities as humans understood them. She seemed concerned with my well-being, often appearing when my anxiety spiked, making soothing gestures or movements that somehow calmed me. 3 months after the accident, I was cleared to return to work. The prospect of driving long-haul routes while surrounded by shadow entities terrified me, but I needed the income. My savings had dwindled during my recovery, and disability payments barely covered my basic expenses. My first route was a relatively short one, Chicago to Indianapolis and back, a single-day journey that would test my ability to drive safely with my new perceptual reality. The hitchhiker appeared in my truck as I was doing my pre-trip inspection, materializing in the passenger seat without warning. "Jesus," I exclaimed, nearly dropping my clipboard. "Don't do that. You're nervous about driving," he observed, ignoring my startled reaction. "Wouldn't you be? I'm about to pilot an 80,000-pound vehicle down the highway, while surrounded by interdimensional beings that no one else can see. What if they distract me? What if I crash trying to avoid one that suddenly moves in front of me?" "They won't interfere with your driving," he assured me. "Most understand the physical dangers of your world even if they're not subject to them directly, and they're drawn to your awareness. They won't risk harming their observer." His words were somewhat reassuring, but I remained anxious as I pulled out of the Chicago terminal and merged onto the highway. Sure enough, shadow entities appeared along the roadside, some keeping pace with my truck, others standing perfectly, still as I passed. Several materialized in my cab, observing silently from the sleeper berth or passenger seat. To my relief, none moved in ways that startled or distracted me. They seemed to understand the importance of letting me focus on driving, keeping their movements slow and predictable when in my direct line of sight. The route passed without incident, and I returned to Chicago with a newfound confidence in my ability to coexist with my shadow companions while working. Over the following weeks, I gradually resumed my regular long-haul schedule, adapting to the constant presence of entities during my drives. What I hadn't anticipated was how the shadow beings would change my experience of the road. America's highways had always been lonely places, especially at night. Empty stretches of asphalt cutting through darkness, with only occasional truck stops and gas stations breaking the monotony. Now these same highways teemed with activity invisible to other drivers. Shadow entities gathered at certain locations, rest areas, crossroads, bridges, as if these places held special significance. They moved in patterns along the roadside, sometimes following vehicles for miles before peeling away. Some appeared to be traveling themselves, moving purposefully along routes that paralleled human highways, but followed some logic I couldn't discern. The hitchhiker continued to appear, periodically, usually materializing in my passenger seat during long night drives. His visits became less instructional and more conversational as time passed, though he remained enigmatic about his own nature and purpose. "Why do you all gather at certain places?" I asked during one such visit, somewhere in the empty darkness of rural Nebraska. "Rest areas, bridges, crossroads, they're always crowded with your kind." "Liminal spaces," he explained. "Places of transition hold thinner boundaries between realities. Easier for us to manifest, easier to observe your world." "And what exactly are you observing? What's so interesting about humans stopping to use the bathroom or get coffee?" The hitchhiker made a gesture that approximated a shrug. "Your species fascinates us. Physical beings with consciousness similar to our own, yet tethered to material forms and linear time. Your experiences are novel to us." "So we're entertainment?" I asked, somewhat offended. "More like a mirror," he corrected, "reflecting aspects of consciousness we cannot experience directly. Your emotions, your physical sensations, your mortality, these are unknown to us except through observation." "Is that why you made me able to see you? So I could be a better observer?" The hitchhiker was silent for a moment. "Partly," he finally admitted. "But there's more to it. Humans with expanded perception serve another function, one I'm not authorized to explain yet." "Authorized by whom?" I demanded. "You've never mentioned any kind of hierarchy or authority among your kind." "There are structures," he said vaguely. "Not hierarchies as you understand them, but patterns of influence and responsibility. I have certain parameters within which I must operate." "That's conveniently cryptic," I muttered. He didn't respond, instead gazing out at the dark highway ahead. After a few miles of silence, he spoke again. "You'll be meeting others soon. Humans, like yourself, who can perceive our kind." This caught me by surprise. "There are others? Why haven't you mentioned them before?" "You needed time to adjust to your own perception first. Meeting others too soon might have complicated your integration process." "How many are there, people like me?" "Fewer than 1,000 globally," he said. "Most live quiet lives, adapting to their perception in isolation. Some find each other through chance or intuition. A small number organize more formally." "Organize? Like a club for people who see shadow? People?" The hitchhiker made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Something like that. They call themselves witnesses. They share information, support new perceivers, and document their observations of our kind." "And you want me to join them?" I asked skeptically. "I'm merely informing you of their existence. What you do with that information is your choice." He paused. "But you might find value in connecting with others who share your experience. Isolation can be challenging for human consciousness." He wasn't wrong. Despite adapting reasonably well to seeing shadow entities everywhere, I'd become increasingly isolated from other people. How could I maintain normal relationships when Half my attention was always focused on beings others couldn't perceive. I'd stopped dating, reduced contact with friends, and kept conversations with colleagues strictly professional. The loneliness was beginning to wear on me. "How do I find these witnesses?" I asked. "You don't need to find them," the hitchhiker replied. "Now that you're ready, they'll find you." True to his word, the first contact came less than a week later. I was at a truck stop in Missouri, having coffee in the restaurant section while a small gathering of shadow entities hovered near the condiment station, seemingly fascinated by the creamer dispensers. A woman slid into the booth across from me, mid-40s, with gray-streaked brown hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent time outdoors. She wore a flannel shirt and jeans, looking like any other traveler passing through. "They're particularly fond of places where food and drink are prepared," she said casually, nodding toward the shadow entities. "Something about the energy of consumption and transformation." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "You can see them." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "For 12 years now. Car accident on Route 66. Woke up in the hospital with unwanted company." She extended her hand. "Ellen Carver." I shook it cautiously. "Mike Donovan. How did you find me?" "We keep track of accidents that fit the pattern. Multiple vehicles, at least one fatality. Survivors with head trauma who report unusual perceptual experiences during medical follow-up." She smiled slightly. "Plus, your hitchhiker friend is known to us. When he takes an interest in someone, we pay attention." "You know him?" I asked, surprised. "We call him the Herald. He's been guiding new perceivers for at least a century from our records. Always appears as a hitchhiker on highways before the triggering accident." I processed this information, watching as one of the shadow entities by the creamer station noticed Ellen and made a gesture that seemed almost like a greeting. She nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "So you're part of this witnesses group," I said. "One of the organizers for the Midwest region," she confirmed. "We're pretty informal. No secret handshakes or membership cards. Just people helping each other cope with seeing what others can't. And documenting what you see," I added, remembering the hitchhiker's description. Ellen nodded. "That's a big part of it. We compare notes, identify patterns, try to understand what these entities are and why they're here. Some of us take a more scientific approach, others more spiritual or philosophical. We accommodate different interpretations." "What's yours?" I asked. "Your interpretation?" She considered the question, watching the shadow entities as they drifted around the truck stop. "I think they're native inhabitants of dimensions that intersect with ours in ways we're only beginning to understand. Not supernatural, just natural in a way our limited perception usually filters out." "And why can we see them when others can't?" "Brain injury is the common factor," she said. "But it's more specific than that. Our research suggests it's damage to particular regions involved in filtering sensory information, the brain's reality testing mechanisms. The injury doesn't give us new abilities. It breaks the filter that prevents most humans from processing what's always there." This aligned with what the hitchhiker had told me, which I found somewhat reassuring. "So what does your group actually do besides compare notes?" "We help new perceivers adjust without ending up medicated into oblivion or institutionalized. We research the entity's behavior patterns and attempt limited communication, and we try to determine their agenda, because they definitely have one." The hitchhiker, the Herald, mentioned something about us serving a function beyond just observing them, I said, but he wouldn't elaborate. Ellen's expression turned serious. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Why go to the trouble of creating more perceivers? Why arrange accidents that break our perceptual filters? They're investing considerable effort in making more humans who can see them, which suggests they need us for something." A chill ran through me. "Need us for what?" "That's the million-dollar question." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card with just a phone number printed on it. "If you're interested in learning more, call this number. We're having a regional meeting next month in St. Louis. Nothing formal, just people, sharing experiences and information." I took the card, studying the plain black digits on white cardstock. I'll think about it. Ellen stood to leave. One more thing, Mike. The entities you're seeing now, they're just the beginning. As your perception continues to develop, you'll start seeing other things. When that happens, call the number immediately. What other things? I asked, alarmed. She just shook her head. Better if you're not anticipating specific forms. Expectation shapes perception. With that cryptic warning, she left, nodding to the shadow entities by the door as she passed. I continued my routes, the card burning a hole in my wallet. Part of me wanted to call immediately, hungry for more information and human connection. Another part was wary of getting pulled deeper into whatever was happening. The hitchhiker had said I had choices, but it increasingly felt like I was being guided along a predetermined path. 2 weeks after meeting Ellen, I experienced what she had warned about. I was driving through Wyoming at dusk, the landscape bathed in fading golden light, when I noticed something different about the shadow entities along the roadside. They seemed agitated, moving with unusual urgency, all facing the same direction, toward the mountains to the west. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw it, a massive shape moving across the distant landscape. Not a shadow entity like the others, but something with substance and dimension that nevertheless didn't seem fully physical. It towered over the terrain, its form shifting constantly but suggesting something vaguely insectoid. Multiple limbs, a segmented body, a head that split and reformed repeatedly. I pulled over, unable to drive while transfixed by the sight. The entity moved with deliberate purpose, each step covering what must have been hundreds of yards. Shadow entities scattered before it like birds before a predator. My truck's radio suddenly came to life, cycling through stations without my touching the dial. Through the static, I heard fragments of voices, not broadcast voices, but something else. Third boundary breach this month. Perceptual membrane thinning faster than projected. Need more anchors before the convergence. The massive entity paused, its shifting head turning in my direction. Though miles distant, I felt its attention focus on me with terrifying precision. One enormous limb raised, pointing directly at my truck. The radio static intensified, resolving into a single voice. Deep, resonant, and utterly inhuman. Witness. Terror gripped me. I fumbled for my keys with shaking hands, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway, accelerating to dangerous speeds. In my mirrors, I could see the colossal entity still watching, its limb still extended toward me, though it made no move to follow. When I finally stopped at a rest area 2 hours later, I called the number Ellen had given me. "I saw something," I said when a man answered. "Not like the shadow people. Something huge in Wyoming." And I heard voices on my radio. A pause, then, "Stay where you are. Someone will reach you within the hour." True to his word, a battered pickup truck pulled into the rest area 40 minutes later. A man in his 60s emerged, white-haired, lean, with the careful movements of someone managing chronic pain. He walked directly to my truck and knocked on the driver's side window. "Mike Donovan?" he asked when I rolled it down. "I'm Howard. Mercer. Ellen sent me. Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the passenger seat and he climbed in with a slight wince. "Motorcycle accident 1987, he explained, noticing my glance. "Broke pretty much everything on my left side. Been seeing them ever since." He settled into the seat. "Tell me exactly what you saw." I described the massive entity, the agitation of the shadow beings, the voices on the radio. Howard listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. "Congratulations," he said when I finished. "You've just had your first encounter with what we call a boundary entity. They exist at the intersection of multiple dimensional planes and can manifest more substantially than the shadow beings you're used to." What was it saying? Something about boundaries and anchors? Howard's expression turned grave. "They're discussing the convergence. It's why they've been creating more perceivers like us. They need anchors for something that's coming." "What's coming?" I demanded. "We're not entirely sure," he admitted. "But based on what we've pieced together from similar encounters, there's some kind of dimensional shift approaching. a closer alignment between their reality and ours. The entities are preparing for it, positioning perceivers like anchor points on a map. Anchor points for what purpose? Stabilization, we think. Humans who can perceive their reality create fixed reference points between dimensions. The more perceivers spread across more locations, the more stable the convergence. I thought about the hitchhiker's cryptic comments about my function and the danger of unstable perceivers. Is this convergence dangerous? That depends on who you ask, Howard said. Some witnesses believe it's a natural cosmic cycle, like seasons or tides, but on a much larger scale. Others think it's an intentional incursion, that the entities are preparing to enter our reality more fully. And what do you think? Howard was silent for a moment. I think we're being used as tools in a process we don't understand, by beings whose nature and motives are fundamentally alien to us. He looked out at the darkened rest area, where shadow entities moved between parked trucks. But I also think resistance is pointless. Whatever's coming has been in motion for longer than human civilization has existed. So we just accept it? I asked incredulously. Roll over and let these things use us as dimensional anchors for some cosmic invasion? Or we try to understand it, Howard countered. Gather information, compare experiences, prepare as best we can. That's what the witnesses do. We can't stop what's coming, but maybe we can influence how it unfolds. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Start recording what you see, especially communications like what you heard on the radio. Locations, times, behaviors that seem significant. Bring it to the meeting in St. Louis. I took the notebook, feeling the weight of it in my hands. You really think writing things down will make a difference? Knowledge is the only power we have in this situation, Howard said simply. The more we understand, the better our chances of surviving whatever comes next. After Howard left, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching shadow entities move through the rest area. They seemed different now, not just curious observers, but active participants in some vast, incomprehensible plan. And I was part of that plan, whether I wanted to be or not. The hitchhiker appeared beside me just before dawn, materializing in the passenger seat Howard had vacated hours earlier. You've seen a boundary entity, he stated without preamble. You knew I would, I accused. You've been preparing me for this all along. He inclined his head slightly. Yes. Why? What is this convergence the voices mentioned? What role am I supposed to play in it? The hitchhiker was silent for a moment, his form seeming more substantial than usual in the pre-dawn light. The convergence is a realignment, a closer intersection of dimensional planes that occurs cyclically. The last one predates human written history. And you need human perceivers as anchors, I pressed. Why? What happens to us during this convergence? Those who can perceive across dimensions serve as fixed reference points, stabilizing influences that prevent chaotic blending of realities. Without anchors, the convergence would cause perceptual distortions affecting all consciousness in both planes. You're being deliberately vague, I said in frustration. What happens to the anchors? To people like me? The hitchhiker's form flickered slightly. I cannot predict individual outcomes. Some anchors may experience enhanced perception, becoming capable of functioning in multiple realities simultaneously. Others may find the perceptual load overwhelming. Overwhelming how? I demanded. Consciousness fragmentation, he admitted reluctantly. Inability to distinguish between dimensional planes, what humans would classify as psychosis. Jesus, I whispered. So I either become some kind of interdimensional superhuman or lose my mind completely? Those are extreme outcomes, the hitchhiker clarified. Most anchors will likely experience something between these poles, expanded awareness with manageable disorientation. And I don't get a choice in this? You became an anchor the moment your perception expanded, he said. But how you prepare for the convergence remains your choice. Those who understand what's happening tend to fare better than those who resist or deny their role. Which is why you've been guiding me toward the witnesses, I realized. They're preparing for this. The hitchhiker nodded. Some more effectively than others. Their understanding is incomplete, but their collective knowledge exceeds what any individual could compile. I thought about the notebook Howard had given me, about Ellen's group comparing notes and experiences. When is this convergence supposed to happen? Soon, the hitchhiker said. By your calendar, within 18 months. And after it happens? What then? A new equilibrium establishes between dimensional planes. Perception shifts permanently for all consciousness in both realities. What was once filtered becomes visible. What was separate becomes connected. The implications were staggering. You're talking about a fundamental change to human reality. Billions of people suddenly seeing shadow entities and boundary beings. Not immediately, he corrected. The perceptual shift will be gradual for most. Strange dreams, peripheral sightings, increased sensitivity to liminal spaces. Only the anchors will experience the full convergence directly. Dawn was breaking, pale light spreading across the horizon. The hitchhiker's form began to fade with the growing brightness. You should attend the witness gathering, he said, his voice becoming fainter. Prepare yourself. Learn what you can. The convergence comes whether you're ready or not. As the first direct sunlight touched my windshield, he vanished completely, leaving me alone with a notebook, 1,000 questions, and the knowledge that I was somehow crucial to a cosmic event I barely understood. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a community center meeting room in suburban St. Louis, surrounded by 30-odd people who could all see what most humans couldn't. They varied in age, background, and how long they'd been perceiving, as they called it. The only common factor was that each had experienced some form of head trauma that had altered their perception. Ellen greeted me at the door. Glad you made it, Mike. Howard told me about your boundary entity sighting. Impressive for someone so newly perceiving. The meeting was both mundane and surreal. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, coffee and cookies on a side table, shadow, entities drifting freely among the human participants. Some of the witnesses had been perceiving for decades and spoke casually about different categories of entities they documented. Others were relatively new like me, still adjusting to their altered reality. What struck me most was the relief of being among people who shared my experience. For the first time since the accident, I could reference the shadow being standing by the window or ask about the voices I'd heard on my radio, without fear of being considered delusional. The discussion eventually turned to the convergence. A woman named Judith, who had been perceiving since a climbing accident in the 1990s, presented what the group had pieced together. Based on communications we've intercepted and patterns we've observed, we believe the convergence is a cyclical event where dimensional planes that normally intersect only at certain points come into broader alignment, she explained, using a diagram showing overlapping circles. During this period, the boundaries between realities become more permeable, allowing greater interaction between dimensional natives. Like a cosmic high tide, someone added. Exactly, Judith nodded. The entities have been preparing for this for centuries, but their activities have intensified dramatically in the last few decades. They're creating more perceivers, more anchors, and positioning them strategically around the world. Positioning how? I asked. Through influence, Howard explained from across the circle. Job opportunities that relocate you, relationships that draw you to specific places, even health issues that limit your mobility when they want you to stay put. They're subtle, but they're guiding us like pieces on a chessboard. This resonated uncomfortably with my own experience. The hitchhiker appearing repeatedly until I picked him up. The accident that could have killed me but instead changed my perception. The convenient medical leave that gave me time to adjust, before returning to a job that kept me mobile across the country. What happens during the convergence itself? Someone else asked. A young man who looked barely out of his teens. Judith exchanged glances with Ellen. We don't know exactly. Historical records suggest previous convergences coincided with periods of widespread mass hysteria or religious visions. The last major one appears to have occurred around 10,000 BCE, based on archaeological evidence of simultaneous cultural shifts across unconnected human populations. We believe anchors experience the convergence most intensely, Ellen added, acting as stabilizing points where realities intersect. The entities need us conscious and functioning during this process, which is why they prepare us rather than simply creating anchors and leaving them to panic or break down. The meeting continued for hours, with witnesses sharing experiences, comparing notes on entity behaviors, and discussing preparation strategies for the coming convergence. Some approached it scientifically, others spiritually. Some saw it as an opportunity for expanded consciousness, others as a threat to human autonomy. What united them was the understanding that something momentous was approaching, something that would fundamentally alter the relationship between our reality and the one we had glimpsed through our broken perceptual filters. As the meeting wound down, Ellen pulled me aside. "What do you think? Will we see you at the next gathering?" I looked around the room at these people who had adapted to seeing what others couldn't, who had built a community around their shared perception. Then I looked at the shadow entities moving among them, entities that had once terrified me but now seemed almost familiar. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll be back. I need to understand what's happening, what my role is in all this." Ellen smiled. "That's what we're all trying to figure out, whether we're victims, tools, or partners in whatever's coming." "And what do you think we are?" I asked. She considered the question seriously. "I think we're witnesses in the truest sense. Not just observers, but testimonies to a reality most humans can't perceive. Whether that testimony is a warning or an invitation remains to be seen." As I drove back to Chicago that night, the highways were alive with shadow entities, more than I had ever seen before, all moving with purpose, all seemingly aware of my awareness. The hitchhiker didn't appear, but I felt his presence nonetheless, guiding me toward a future where the shadows would no longer be confined to the edges of human perception. Whatever the convergence would bring, enlightenment or madness, invasion or evolution, I was part of it now. An anchor in a cosmic tide that had been rising since before humanity existed. A dark hitchhiker myself, traveling between realities, witnessing what others couldn't see. And somewhere ahead, the boundaries between worlds were thinning, preparing for a reunion of realities long separated but never truly apart. I would be there when it happened, eyes open, perception expanded, for better or worse, a witness to the convergence. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.